Let's start with an introduction. Tell the audience about like who you are, where they can find you online, and
Okay,
what kind of work you've done in this industry.
okay. Hi, hello. So my name is Shao Han. So my surname, my family name is Tan. So yeah, like you can find me on Blue Sky. I think like I'm Big Prawn. It's a terrible WUXIA pun that I'll explain next time. But like you can find me as Big Prawn on Blue Sky, and I am currently in. I sort of like trying out different kind of like freelance work for different companies in the TTRPG sphere. I'm from Singapore, and my work I can be found on also on this company Curious Chimeras is based in Singapore. We're currently going through a bit of a rebranding and restructuring, but I guess I have two aspects to my life. One is I teach for my sort of quote unquote day job, whatever that might be. And then I also make games in my other day job, I guess, which is where I guess this interview takes place. And sometimes the two overlap because I find students who might have been adjacent to the sort of games I've made, or I use my teaching and research experience in the games that I create.
Oh, I love that. Can you share like what do you teach? I'm so
Oh,
curious.
okay. I guess like in terms of my background and my training, I think like I would actually be considered an Asianist. Like so, my background's in Southeast Asian studies, but that's also kind of it has a few different things, and mostly it's actually in history and anthropology. So I think like
Okay.
there was a point in time that I think for the World Guide, then I was like very happy to meet. I think Emma, I think also from Asians represent. And yeah, she's an anthropologist working on the like grains in Japan, and I was very happy to kind of like be able to read her work and to see like similar things. So actually, my that's my background, and I used to teach Southeast Asian studies. So I used to teach about like for example, things about things about Buddhism, things about Hinduism, things about temples, and things about like art, as well as certain things about like I guess politics and economics of like Southeast Asia in the 20th century. But
Yeah.
actually, as of late, I haven't been doing that because there's not been a lot of I guess interest in these things, and so schools I've ended up mostly working on somewhat more like a how to have corporate ready skills or like how to do design thinking, and so kind of like I've moved away from like my humanities roots. I think like that's why games like for example the Tian Xia World Guide and Character Guide, especially this kind of projects have been very fun for me because I get to kind of like engage again with my, I guess, Asian studies kind of background because I've just been doing corporate adjacent teaching, I guess, if that makes
I
sense.
I
Yeah.
feel the exact same way as somebody who works in corporate world during the day. I know Emma because before Asians represent because we used to be colleagues at the same university, and so for me,
Yeah.
working in games is a great way to still engage with my academic side.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so a similar feeling. So you mentioned working on like the world guide and the character guide, and this episode of Asians Represent is all about the character guide. First of all,
Yeah.
actually, before we continue, I should say congratulations. We share an Emmy award now for the world
Yeah.
guide.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it's like it's kind of unreal. It's like that I was
yeah,
staying up. I got up really early, and I guess you all staying up instead, right? And I was like kind of like taking a drink in my hand. And I realized I didn't let go of it until they said that we won, and I was like, yeah, I can drink now. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
It was
actually fell asleep early before the announcement, so I
yeah,
woke up to everybody being like,
yeah.
"Oh, we won!"
Yo, yeah, yeah, yeah. You woke
I
up and the
completely
world was
forgot.
like a yeah, yeah. It was like such a it was like something that I nearly forgot as well. Then I was like, wait, isn't this Gen Con weekend? And I was like, yeah,
Yeah,
excited.
it's
Yeah,
hard to remember that Gen Con is happening if you're not going.
yeah, yeah,
But yeah, congratulations. So
yeah,
I want to talk
yeah,
about
yeah. Hooray!
character guide for this episode. So when I was trying to figure out who to have on the episode, I was talking to James Case, and James mentioned that you had added in some wuxia stuff for your contributions.
Yeah.
And so I'd love to hear more about what you contributed from a wuxia perspective to the
Okay.
character guide now that our
Okay.
NDAs have been lifted.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Now that NDS is lifted, it's like I mean, I guess one of the main things I like to talk about is I guess like I mean, wuxia is such a I guess wuxia is such a different thing to different people, right? And actually, like a little bit before I started this project for the character guide, I was doing a lot of, I guess, academic research into WUXIA as like its literary and cinematic kind of roots. And so it was just kind of like, it kind of worked out that I was in the headspace when the character guide, the job, kind of like the different kind of like possibilities came in. And so I was like fresh with that in mind and kind of moved in. And so my personal kind of like background and bias is because I grew up kind of watching uh, a lot of like uh, Hong Kong productions of wuxia on the big screen and the small screen. So I kind of grew up in the I was born in 1980, so like basically I kind of grew up during that golden era of like the new wave of wuxia, like all the Sweethawk stuff, and
Yeah.
kind of like on reruns it'll be all the 1970s stuff, like all the King Hu stuff, right? So I kind of like had the visual library always in my head, as well as kind of like uh the the general kind of like late night reruns as well of like 80 episodes of those TVB wuxia reproduction dramas, and they'll just be like in my head all the time. And so when I kind of like got a chance to kind of work on the character guide, one thing that I wanted to work with was to kind of like evoke a certain sense of like as that cinematic language as well. And so like one of the main things I was thinking about was like, all right, when I got the job, one of the things inside the request was actually to create something to work with the phenomena of Qing Kong, basically of like the likeness arts, right? And
Yep.
so I was like thinking, all right, I guess then I went to look into Pathfinder 1's history, and that Qing Kong meant something very particular in Pathfinder 1. It's like, I think it was some ultimate combat thing or something, which was some kind of like Qing Kong warrior. And I was thinking, all right, so if you want Qing Kong, how can I make something about Qing Kong? What is Qing Kong? And at that point of time, I was still practicing some martial arts. I've kind of like left my sifu for a long time, but my sifu was this like 80-year-old guy who's got like really good health, and so it's like, what is okay, this guy must be kind of a cultivator with his inner strength, right? I was thinking about
He's
like
cultivating.
yeah, it's like, it's like 80 years old and he's got like he's still really healthy. And like and the thing is, I was also really thinking about what does it mean to possess kind of like, I guess, inner energy, and also like likeness energy. What does it mean to kind of like have the ability to control your breath and your body in that way? And I was looking in Pathfinder 2, and the monk was treading a lot at the ground, and inside the job request is also to kind of compliment the monk, but not uh, kind of like retread old ground. And so that was kind of like what I was coming with flying swords and like, people staring at each other, and like kind of like mysterious kind of techniques that required people to be kind of like study a lot. And so all that came into my
Secret
contribution.
manuals.
Yeah, secret manuals, and kind of like there was so much possibility space to work with. There was so much like things, and wuxia also has some elements that for me as I guess a new school fan, it's like that I didn't want to reproduce or emphasize too much, because the misogyny in the field of wuxia and Xinxia are very noticeable, especially because we have a very male facing audience for that in a lot of work. And so there's always like a there's also like a subtle racism that is either subtle or not subtle at all. And so I was like, all right, as a fan, but how do I kind of like work on this in a way that was also more acceptable, as well as more, I guess, more progressive for this 21st century. So that was kind of like my headspace, like all these things, and how do I put that? And I filtered down to my final choices that I kind of like pitch over for Paizo in the book.
Yeah, I love to hear that. I love how you were very conscious about bringing in a new audience to this genre, but also very subtly. I think one thing that I'm going to ask the other folks that I'm interviewing for this episode is, you know, wuxia is like a very very specific genre of fiction, and you talk about that cinematic language of the classic
Yeah,
wuxia movies, like King Hu. I like Come Drink with Me is
yeah,
probably one of the most important wuxia movies of all time. I think Dragon Inn is another King Hu movie, is like an incredible movie because it is fully encapsulates what a Pathfinder campaign might be. You have to
mm,
go to this remote inn and you have to find these kids and
yeah,
save them. and there are all of these different agendas in place, and it's very complicated. Um, and as somebody who's like designing a wuxia game of my own, like outside of Pathfinder, I have a lot of freedom to do what I want with the system, to evoke the specific themes that I want to lean in on. But when working on something like the character guide, you kind of have to work within the bounds of
Yeah.
Pathfinder's rules. Uh,
Yeah.
you have to work within the confines of the existing mechanics, some of the existing lore, even though we got to rewrite a lot of stuff. So I want to ask you
Yeah.
this: like, what were some challenges that you kind of faced when actually trying to meet your goals of incorporating these elements of wuxia into the character guide?
Okay. I think I have a few kind of like things that come to mind, but I think the first one is obviously because Pathfinder 2 especially is a game that works a lot off a certain kind of tempo and balance, right? It's like character and as well as like fantasy TTRPGs based on this vein in which you're a party of heroes going around doing things. You have to sort of depend on each other. Whereas like in a lot of like wuxia, the protagonist has like it's like one versus many. It's like there's a very strong element of like that swashbuckling kind of like you're mowing down a lot of like facing a lot of enemies, and then you're better than everybody, and then you finally have like a heroic duo, like 1v1 against like the your antagonist, right? But then what
Yeah.
happens is that that tempo doesn't actually work in Pathfinder, because what happens is that this is a game of like stacking mechanic bonuses, trying to get like a critical successes through stacking the 10 above the AC. That kind of like encourages teamwork, which is what Pathfinder it's like core and experience is about. So firstly, in terms of translation, it can't be a one for one translation. Like I can't create like some overpowered build that would basically option that would invalidate other balance options, and just because I'm trying to emulate a certain kind of genre convention. And so I think that's the first one, like how do I kind of like fit the feeling into a world. And so kind of like for me it's kind of like if the character in wuxia is supposed to feel powerful and supposed to feel like either competent or graceful in some way, how do you make sure that they can feel that way without and let them have the power fantasy of like hey, this is a wuxia character, without basically overturning the core fundamental premises of the game. And with that in mind, the second thing how the challenges came about is also the classes that I work on a lot to give options for are the makers. And the makers is also a pretty troublesome kind of like a design space to navigate around, because they're always fighting against this uh, you're always fighting against this like invisible bugbear, which is like saying, why are you not spending 2 actions to do a spell strike, basically? So I could throw in all the like the bells and whistles, like, oh, this makes you fly around, you can jump around, woohoo, you get bonus damage for fighting the sword. But then like there'll always be essentially this like the specter of comparison. Why are you not spell striking? And so
Yeah. Are you doing the optimal thing?
are you doing the optimal thing, right? And I play it with various groups. Some groups don't care what optimal thing, and I think they'll be very happy to be able to kind of do different things, get static bonuses here and there to change the playstyle up. And I think some groups will be like, "Oh man, this sucks. This does not allow me to do the thing that I was already going to do anyway." And so, from a design perspective, I had to think like, from a big picture, I cannot just create for like it's a very Pareto principle. I can't create for the 20% that will play it to like they're basically playing competitive PvE games, right? I can't create for them as the baseline. And so the thing is that if there's something that they can take some unforeseen interaction that they can transform into something that makes them mechanically happy to their heart's content, I'm very glad. But at the same time, I would like to make it such that someone who's like, I just want to have something that makes me feel like I am a wuxia character off the bat, and I don't have to do too much meddling around on a mechanical level. I can just pick this and it won't be too much of a hassle. That's kind of like something like I would like to uh, design something for that end of the user base as much as for the competitive kind of like, I guess, competitive PvE players, I guess. Yeah, and
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah. That's very interesting because I love how you kind of talked about the Magus and how you're like, well, because of its sort of where it lies in Pathfinder's design space, there is some freedom for you to actually incorporate your design goals into it. But you sent me
Oh
a
yeah, yeah,
thread that you did on Blue Sky. I think this,
yeah.
so I read through it this morning, and I thought it was wonderful because when I try to incorporate elements of like other genres into the games that I work on, not just Pathfinder, but like Dungeons and
Hmm.
Dragons, like Candela Obscura, all of the other games that I've worked
Yeah,
on, I found that I've had the best success in like character options, not necessarily mechanics because those are so established, but in terms of themes. How do you incorporate themes into the play style of folks? Because you said like there are folks who are going to want to do the optimal thing, and then there are folks who are going to want to do whatever they think is interesting or cool.
yeah.
And one of the ways that I found success in that, and I've seen that in other games that I've played, is that when I have backstory options or background options or things that reinforce the narrative, they kind of get me to change how I interact with the mechanics. So
Mm,
you mentioned very specifically the theme of melancholy in wuxia.
mm, yeah.
How can you kind of share with the audience how you try to uh, evoke that within your
Okay.
design work in the character guide?
Okay, so like I think like if you look at the two biggest options in the character guide that's coming out, the two hybrid studies. One of them is kind of like the aloof firmament, and that's the one where melancholia is a big part of the emotion, and the other one is the unfolding brocade. And actually, both of those are a reference over to, I guess, like certain big wuxia tropes. But I guess in terms of visually speaking, it's probably influenced by I guess the Swordsman series, the Swordsman trilogy of movies that Sweetheart made in the 1990s. So it's like we have Bridget Lynn in the very kind of like the icon for nearly all the queer men that I knew in the 90s and 2000s were like referred to that character, the Invincible East, the Tong Fang Pupa, as sort of like their awakening, the gender awakening moment. Like, oh, okay, and like this like androgynous figure, and that's the one that uses needles and scarves and clothing to fight effortlessly. Like it's kind of a badass moment. It's like I'm using like very delicate things to defeat all your swords and armor and shields, right? That's kind of a very understated. I'm stronger than you. Please don't even try. And it's also about social class. It's like there's this very rich person obviously beating you up, and like you can try your best with like weapons, but this person's like I don't know, like they're like 1,000 jade needle is more powerful than your sword, right? And the other character, the aloof moment, the melancholy aspect, it's like a lot of it is about flying, and I think in wuxia a lot of it is like what looks to people to be like, hey, your character's flying around and looks graceful, and a lot of it, I mean, comes from I guess like practical special effects. Like that's how
The wire
pacing
work.
opera wire work, right? Like acrobatics, everything kind of work. But there's also, if you look at like old movies all the way to like you were mentioning the King Hu movies earlier, there's also usually like a lot of stock type characters of like the sword master. I guess if you use the most familiar example to perhaps some listeners would be like in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. We have basically the Chorin Fat's character is kind of reluctant to get back into the fighting and the killing, but he has to kind of like do that to kind of like find the missing sword. And same thing for a lot of these times, we have this like really powerful sword masters who are able to do so many graceful things. They are so learned. They're so able to kind of like do anything that they put their minds to, and but they cannot defeat the fundamental nature of the world, which is something that calls them to violence. Like they would like to be friends with someone else who is really powerful as well, but their clan demands they fight, society demands they fight, history demands they fight, and even when they win, they kind of lose. And that's something that the kind of melancholy. And I think because for in Asia, like having gone through like so much like war and colonialism, and so much like you see so many generations of your youngest bravest pass away for no real reason. So I guess kind of like the inbuilt pessimism of the 20th century, as well as when social change happened, when we became very capitalistic, to like, hey, society is changing too fast and our friends are turning on each other. And I think a lot of that can be seen in how Jianghu fields come out, right? Like everyone's like, we're all talking about we are the best, we are all moral and everything, but then everyone's like betraying their friends in order to get a bigger piece of the pie, right? And so for
Everybody's
me,
got their code, but there is no one code that everybody
yeah,
follows.
yeah,
They're more like guidelines than rules.
yeah, and like in the course of doing things that people can just say, I want to follow my idea. My idea is like the best idea. My idea, it may lead into self-destructive behavior, but at least I am noble. So it's with that in mind that when I created this Magus, and also because I didn't make any edicts for it. I think like because like the Magus is not a class that interacts with edicts or anathema like in any way. That's more like usually the champion's ballpark. And but how did I kind of like try to do it was to kind of use, I guess, imagery of words and for the names of the feats. So a central mechanism of flying is that, yeah, you're kind of like rising up above the tempo of violence, but you have to kind of land to make a melee strike. So it's not a, hi, I'm flying and I get to shoot at you from far away from a safe distance. No, you kind of have to land and feel the impact, feel the blood in your on your hands as when you come back to Earth again, and that's why like you get bonus damage for kind of like a soaring. So that's kind of like my design mechanic. I don't think that might be very kind of like intuitive to people. It's like, okay, I'm probably getting momentum or I strike. That also works as an interpretation. But I guess for me, it's kind of like I think one of my names for my descriptions for all the feats, the focus spells, is that you have like you can lift yourself into the sky with like your supernatural balance and enlightenments, but you come back down, you're grounded by violence again. So that's something that I wanted to kind of capture. And it's also kind of like the protagonist characters, because WUXIA has a lot of characters who usually their masters betray them, their friends abandon them, and they're trying very hard to be an upright person, but it doesn't really work out very well for them. And so this is something which it could be the melancholy of youth as you grow up and realize that, oh my god, my master's an asshole. Or you could basically be the melancholy of being old and realizing that, you've been too stubborn, that you've alienated everyone around you. And I couldn't really express those mechanically because that doesn't really make sense for a magus. But I guess like conceptually, like having things like being able to walk on water, being able to kind of like fly. Yes, that's also kind of wuxia tropes, but it's also kind of like you're treading a very fine balance, and you're kind of like trying to tread the needle, I guess, in a way. Like kind of this kind of high tension life, I guess.
Yeah, when I was reading through your thread and you were literally talking about, you know, metaphysical lightness being above violence, I thought that was very interesting because, when folks are going to be playing the game, there are folks who are familiar with the genre and can appreciate that. And then there are going to be folks who see this as like a cool, unique option to use in battle. And
Yeah,
there's nothing wrong with either of those. What I think is most interesting about this and how you've kind of gone about this from a design perspective is that you've added nuance to the game. You've added the ability for people to kind of explore these narrative themes as they interact with the more transactional mechanics, which
yeah,
I really admire. I really admire that. And I really like how you've kind of thought about balance and power at the same time. Because in your thread, you talked about the idea of the Jian Qi, like the sword Qi, and like
yeah,
shooting energy from swords, which
yeah,
in a lot of wuxia media and xianxia media to like a wider extent can be seen as like super super overpowered. So I
yeah,
like how earlier in the interview you talked about making seemingly overpowered options to invalidate existing balance to change the
yeah,
tempo of a game, but also taking considerations, like you said in your thread, of having to lower the power of things to ensure that they kind of didn't break the overall game
yeah,
experience of Pathfinder.
yeah. And a large part of that, like for example, like that particular the sword light feat in level 10, that is essentially quite a lot of that is actually from I think James and the rest of the team. I think what happened was like because for me as a freelancer, I think one of the things that I feel very confident about is that when I put in my turnovers, like the team will look at it like, how does this best fit within I guess the overall, the meta of play, right? The big picture. And so there was, of course, that discussion which, like, I think James came back to me and said, "Hey, do you think Sword Light is a good name for it?" And I said, "Yeah, I think it works out pretty well because calling it Sword, she within the context of where she already means something
There's no
specific in the game
established.
mechanic.
There's no yeah. The chi
Yeah,
is very
yeah,
different.
she is very different, and there's no like the poetic language is different, right? So like it's sort of like how it works. It's kind of a light, and then people were thinking it's a lightsaber, and then that sure, why not? Basically, whatever translates across audiences, and like I think the good thing about it is that at the end of the day, like I could have a vision, for example, that nuance they talk about a vision, and for me as a freelancer, as a kind of a contractor in that sense, it's like, hi, what is my cultural vision of sorts, and then how do we mechanically translate it? And having the support of a large, kind of like a team that has a very large set of experiences to kind of like make something work within their world and still kind of capture the vision I was trying to go for has been a great privilege. And a lot of the things that for me, even though I'm like, yeah, I helped create this, a lot of the fine tuning and as well as the final cut, a lot of it basically is a lot of interactions and discussions between the team and myself as just one person of many in this process, right? Yeah. And so that's
Oh
kind of like
yeah,
like it's just something I really enjoy working with the Paizo team about this because there's this back and forth. Yeah.
yeah. I absolutely love that. That's the perfect way to end this segment of the
Yeah.
interview. No,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
That's did you have anything else that you wanted to sort of
Yeah.
share with the audience before, like, what is your like anything that you're looking forward to the audience seeing when they
I
get their
think
hands on the character guide?
I think one of the things that I am quite I guess if I have some time to kind of like discuss that would be actually like the other kind of two things. One would be actually the other WUXIA adjacent thing, which is there the cultivator. I guess that's more Tian Xia, and there's an archetype in there, and that one was where kind of like I just had a lot of fun taking phrases from Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, and kind of like, hey,
Yeah.
let's kind of like evoke those things and fantasize it a little bit. And I think Daniel at the beginning asking, how did I kind of like put that into Pathfinder challenges, right? And
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest one because cultivation means so many different things. I had this decision matrix where I was like, sorry, I had
Oh,
this
no worries.
decision matrix where I was like, what kind of cultivation do I want to work with? Do I want to work with the kind of things that people have in web novels, that people have in video games, like the kind of like the system, like the cultivation systems with like
Yeah,
strange,
the big level up systems or
the big level of system. Then I was like, nah, that's not really kind of like that. That's not something that I particularly can say that I have like a lot of like enjoyment of. It's not to say I don't like it, but it's something that kind of like came a bit after my time since I'm in my 40s now. And so a lot of my friends are really into it because like they kind of consume it on a video process. But for me, since my head canon was set in like, all right, I'm talking about this old 1980s, 90s, I decided to take a different direction for the cultivator, which was I decided to look into because I was talking about my sifu for a while, and like I was talking about how like he's really fit for 80-year-old guy, and like he introduced me to some of his masters and to other students, and since I was young, a lot of times I met people who were, I guess, RLL cultivators of some sort, and like and so I decided to kind of go into my studies of like as an Asian studies major, so I kind of went to dragged out my Tao Te Ching, dragged out my Lao Tzu, and dragged out my Zhuangzi, and like, okay, what is the superior man? What is the sage? What is the scot? What is the saint? The cultivator supposed to be like in this classical text and Buddhist text. And so I kind of like wanted to create something that was emulating that, kind of like somebody who's bodily fitness, because a lot of this text is about how do you transcend the world, how do you become immortal, how do you not die, right? Basically. And so a lot of the cultivator is like, I had one commission. Hi, this person wants to cultivate immortality. They want to not die. And hopefully this archetype helps them not die. And as a nod over to, I guess, more contemporary understandings of cultivation with the level of systems now, there was, of course, the feed inside that allow you to see cultivation materials, which I had fun with because Pathfinder doesn't have cultivation materials. They don't have, oh, this is
Mhm.
an obscure grass that you're going to get magic powers from. But I could use it to key to precious materials and life sense, which could work for some people. And there's also some parts which I guess is really a kind of nod over to fans of the Untamed or the Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation, which cultivation you had like the orthodox path where you transcend into immortality, become maybe a minor official in heaven and take charge of taking care of the rain or weather, which is a very Chinese kind of god thing to do. Or you
Yeah.
could kind of like descend into the underworld and like be wronged and then have a big revenge plot and animate the undead in a quest to get your justice that heaven ignores, which is so a big trope, not just in, of course, the Untamed, which is where a part of the energy came from, but also in a lot of other things and in a lot of like even like ghost stories that we have of like basically people who are wronged and they come back. And so that was actually very fun for me to create the cultivator, and I hope people have fun with it. I've heard some people say it's a really odd kind of choice of like spells and rituals and feats, but like guess like I want to kind of like share a bit of where I'm coming from. It's like, hey, you're becoming a traditional classical immortal, and you're also becoming kind of like playing with some aspects of maybe web novel and recent drama things, but it's that they'll mix and compromise. I hope is good for everyone. So that's something the cultivator was one of the things I really wanted to kind of like pull people to, because it's WUXIA adjacent, it's Tian Xia basically.
Yeah, for sure. I think that with with cultivators, you're gonna have a mixed response because when people think of Xinxia, they think of so many different themes. They think of
Yeah, yeah.
the romance, they think of the divine responsibilities, and then there are also people who, when they think of Xinxia, they think of the the powers in combat, right? They
Mm.
think of like the
Like
elemental
formations and
generation,
seals. Yeah.
yeah, everything like that. Like for me, one of my favorite sort of Xinxia sort of, I guess, adjacent pieces of media, recent pieces, is Fog Hill of the Five Elements.
Oh
Have you
yeah,
seen
yeah,
that?
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
I
I've seen
think that
that.
is so cool.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and I think for people who enjoy Pathfinder, Fog Hill of the Five Elements is something that may resonate with you. The
Yeah, yeah.
idea of like having these very, very strong combat abilities.
Yeah.
But I also
And
think that we should, even if to your words they feel odd, have options in place for people to explore the other elements of Xianxia as well. It may not
yeah,
resonate with every single gamer, but I think the great thing about Pathfinder is that there are just so many options for you,
yeah,
and you can choose to interact with them in any way that you want. And so I'm grateful that like you've done this work, you've put in the effort to give people more variety in how they
yeah,
actually explore wuxia and xianxia themes in
yeah.
Pathfinder.
Yeah, and I think like basically like as we kind of like God, I don't want to kind of like go on for too long, but I also kind of like think like because with the Asians represent kind of like inviting me over for this conversation, like actually the representation issue is something that I was thinking a lot about. It's like I wanted to create something that would invite, for example, new audiences, especially because RPGs, CTRPGs, especially in the 21st century, is such we're going through such a renaissance as a field, right? It's like I could say to people like, yeah, I kind of work on TTRPGs, and I just had to say it's kind of like D&D, and then people like understand basically. So I didn't have to kind of like, hi, it's kind of like collaborative storytelling where I didn't run my macro. I had to do it in the early 2000s. Like
Yeah.
people just kind of get, oh yeah, yeah, I understand, and like I guess like I want to kind of like make it such a it's like there are people who are playing this game, they're buying these books from uh and then because of things like Pathfinder, Archives on Net, is like people could play these games on anywhere, even if they don't have the book after it gets like updated, and it could be playing with somebody who's like has a totally different culture background from me, and I wanted to have some degree of there's a authenticity, I guess, whatever that word means, in the sense of like I guess sincerity, I guess more sincerity, and this was how me as a person in Asia here in the diaspora sees these things, and I would like to share this with you. So and people who might have the same diasporic experiences as me, it's like, hey, growing up, let's say like so King Hu movies or Sui Hak movies or like Jin Yong novels, and like, hey, I can see where the design inspiration for this is. It's like, and I would like to play this because it speaks to my experiences, my interests. At the same time, to be something which is, I guess, in a way, open enough to tweaking interactions and improvisation. So there's somebody who's like, I'm not from this area. My last thing that I watched actually was like maybe they're more familiar with like hi, I watched Star Wars Acolyte, and there has wuxia elements in it. I guess like
Yeah, definitely.
Jedi jump around. So that's kind of like WUXIA, right? And like let's say like somebody's coming from there, and I don't want to gatekeep. It's like, hi, there are some notes and nuances in there, but if you like to, you can go and pick it up on your own to find out more. But it's not there to like shame you, like, hey, you did not have authenticity awards 1101, like, you did. And so
Yeah.
you're not cultural enough to play this game, which was my experience as a young RPG. When I played other TTRPGs, they were modeled off Asian kind of like settings, and I was being told by my GMs that you are, as an Asian, not Asian enough to play this game about Asian people. And so I kind of wanted to move away from that to really have things that would invite people to represent like their own wishes, fantasies, and dreams inside a kind of like a triple A kind of like a project like Pathfinder, I guess.